Today, we'll be looking at one of the most historically mixed race groups in southern Africa, the Basters or Rehoboth Basters, who reside in the town of Rehoboth in central Namibia. The word Basta, which translated means bastard. However, the proud and hardy Basters take the name with pride, and they had given it to themselves because this name reminds them of their history, although abroad it may seem a bit insensitive. So join me and let us look at their history and Rehoboth currently. Don't forget to subscribe and let's jump into today's video. The Basters mainly descend from European settlers, with other sources saying white trek Boers, who descend from European settlers on the frontiers of the Dutch Cape Colony, and Khoi female primarily, with other ethnic groups such as Bantu groups during the colonial period in the 17th to 18th century, who resided in the Dutch Cape Colony, as by the late 18th century, many Khoi communities had broken up and lost their stock to colonial settlers due to the expansion of agriculture and trade, and were now forced to work for them. Basters speak a language that is primarily Afrikaans. During the Dutch rule of what is now South Africa, they had been considered superior to the black native population and enjoyed privileges not provided to other people of color at that time, but still considered too black to be treated as white. However, the term Bastard would also come to represent a non-white cultural group at that time that was comparatively more economically advanced during that period. Some Bastards acted as supervisors of other servants, while sometimes treated as members of the colonial family. Many Bastards were descended from European men, if not directly from the men in the families where they had worked. Majority of Bastards were mixed race. However, many free black natives on Khoi had joined this group in addition to other mixed race people who had managed to acquire land and establish themselves as farmers in their own right. Bastards are closely related to Griquas and coloureds from South Africa, who they share a somewhat similar language and culture. Although some Bastards did not identify with Cape colours and had distinguished themselves, as they had believed them to be descendant of European men and Indonesian or Malay women or slaves. In the 18th century, many Bastards had managed to become successful farmers, owning farms in the colony. However, the colony would implement oppressive laws, which greatly affected non-Europeans as a result of race discrimination and growing competition for land. Due to this, Bastards who wanted to maintain their independence moved to the outskirts of the colony, while others were absorbed into the colored servant class. The Kamiesberg in Northern Cape from 1750 became the main area of settlement for independent Basta farmers. Roughly 30 years later, they had further migrated to the middle of the Orange River due to increasing competition for land and resources, as well as oppressive laws. The Bastards who had remained in this area had later adopted the name Griqua. As a result of all of this, the Bastards by the 1860s announced their plan to migrate. In 1870, the Bastards who had migrated out of the Cape Colony had moved into and been given permission to settle in Rehoboth in now central Namibia by the participants of Peace Conference of Okahanja on 23 September 1870. They had been accompanied by a German missionary by the name Johann Christian Friedrich Hiedman, who during warfare between the Herero and the Namakwa acted as a mediator at peace talks between the Bastards and the Herero, as well as in the early 1890s working closely with German authorities to secure Basta cooperation against Namakwa leader Hendrik Witbooi, who is regarded as a Namibian hero. Within a few years, the Bastards would now become closely linked to the town of Rehoboth and become identified as the Rehoboth Bastards or Rehobothers. During this time, they had managed to establish a strong community with their own government, leadership structure and constitution by 1868, which was amended and drafted in 1872, known as the Paternal Laws, which continues to govern them till today. We'll cover more on this during this video. They had established a community based on birth with these laws, such as a citizen as a child of a Rehoboth citizen or individual accepted as a citizen by its rules, by procedures in Articles 15 and 16 of the drafted Constitution in 1872, with different families joining this community from the Cape Colony, with the population reaching 1.5 by 1885. While most Basters based around Rehoboth, some continued to trek northward, settling in the southern part of Angola in a city by the name Lobamfo, where they became known as the Ovamo, allegedly. Through the 1870s, the Basters of Rehoboth suffered many losses, such as their livestock raided and stolen by much larger groups, such as the Nama and Herero peoples in the area, who themselves were in competition. In 1880, Jan Jonker Afrikaner, the last captain of the Oalam Afrikaners in southwest Africa, gathered 600 men against these groups and mustered about 1,000 fighters, with the Herero documented having relatively the same numbers. The Basters of Rehoboth tried to make alliances to survive, as they were outnumbered by both sides, and their numbers of able-bodied men much lower. It is documented that they had hoped for more families from the Cape Colony or any place would arrive to increase their size. The wars continued to about 1884, and while they suffered many losses, they continued displaying their continued resilience to harsh situations, with it being documented that Rehoboth thriving during this time, and the 1880s has seen the community receive new families from an area known as Grootfontein. By 1885, during the process of German annexation of Southwest Africa, Captain Hermanus van Wyk signed a treaty of protection and friendship with the German Empire, which permitted him to retain a level of autonomy in exchange for recognizing German colonial rule, a first of its kind between any native descended peoples in the territory and the Germans, with the Basters being considered native due to their partial African descent. By 1893, the Germans had established the boundaries of the Bastard territory, known as the Rehoboth Gebied. In this area, the Bastard Paternal Laws were recognized. In addition, the German colony had an administrative district known as Rehoboth, which itself was larger than the Bastard governed area. A second treaty concerning national service of the Rehoboth Basters of 1895 established a small armed contingent among the Basters, which had fought with German forces in battles against the indigenous peoples of the area. When German colonists encountered a new wave of conflicts with the native people, Basters fought with them in sorting out uprisings such as the Over Herero in 1896. They also reportedly participated in the German colonial war. Around 1896, the Germans had changed their racial classifications. Rather than using one's citizenship, as in the community of the Basters, they began to classify people in terms of appearance. So, for example, if the enumerator thought essentially a Baster was Nama, then that person would be classified as Namakwa. A comparison of records suggests that in 1912, there were 3,000 Basters in the Rehoboth district. Most Basters were concentrated in the Rehoboth Gebied, where they lived under their own laws, such as the Paternal Laws, which are still to be covered in this video. Relations between Rehoboth and Germany remained good for more than 20 years. However, following the outbreak of World War I, the German Schutztruppe, please forgive my pronunciation, which was the official name of the colonial troops in the African territories of the German colonial empire from the late 19th century to 1918. They had ordered all able-bodied Basta men into military service. However, they had resisted, as is documented that the Basters tried to maintain neutrality towards the Germans and South Africa, fearing losing their limited autonomy, as they believed the German Schutztruppe had little chance against the superior South African forces, which were allied with the British. The second captain of the Rehoboth Basters, Cornelius van Wyk, arranged a secret meeting with South African General Louis Botha on April 1st in Walvis Bay to assure him of the Basters' neutrality. No record was made of the meeting, so it is unclear exactly what was promised. The aim of this meeting was for assurances to have Bastard territory and interests secured if South Africa took over the German colony. Botha had advised them to stay out of the war. Due to South African successes, German officers advised the Bastard Council that they were moving the prisoners of war and Bastard guards to the north, with the Bastards fearing that having their men in the north would mean they would be considered as enemies of South Africa, endangering their own position. Learning of the planned deployment, numerous Bastards defected from German service, taking arms with them that they intended to turn in at Rehoboth. Learning of this, the Germans disarmed other Bastard soldiers in other posts. In the process, one unarmed Bastard was killed. The Rehoboth community was furious, although leaders tried to meet with the Germans to resolve the issues. However, in the meantime, Bastard and Nama policemen worked to disarm German officers within the Rehoboth Gabet, but wounded one fatally and straight up killed another reportedly. An armed contingent, including Nama policemen, killed several German citizens. On April 22nd, 1915, the Bastards were informed that they had violated the Protection Treaty and that their acts were viewed as hostile by the Germans. Governor Theodor Sitz followed up by cancelling the Protection Treaty with the Bastards, with the intention to attack Rehoboth. Van Wyk informed General Botha, who advised him to try to get the Bastards out of the area, which involved Bastards moving by wagons and taking large herds of livestock, with many of them trying to reach the mountains. The Germans' attacks against the Bastards took place around the region. According to the history of the Bastards, a 14-year-old Bastard girl who worked for the Germans in a camp overheard a drunken conversation about their planned attack against the Bastards. She took the word to the captain, and around 700 Bastards retreated to Samkubis, 800 kilometers southeast of Rehoboth in the mountains, to prepare for the attack. This group included women and children. On the 8th of May 1915, the Germans had attacked in the Battle of Samkubis, where the stronghold was defended by roughly 700 to 800 Bastards. Although the Germans had attacked repeatedly with the use of 3 Maxim machine guns and 2 cannons, the Germans were surprisingly unable to destroy the Bastards' position, yet again demonstrating their resilience. At the end of the day, the Bastards had all but run out of ammunition and were expecting imminent defeat. It is reported that that night they had appealed to God, pledging to commemorate the day forever should they be spared, which they do currently till this day, with the prayer being engraved on a memorial plaque they later installed at Samkubis, which you can read on the screen. As it seems the prayer had worked out, as the Germans had been ordered to retreat, which they did the next morning, so as to intercept advancing South African forces which had reached the Rehoboth. However, things would take a turn for the worse for the Germans, as when the Bastards returned to Rehoboth, some Bastards killed Germans on their farms, with the Germans trying to post forces for protection. However, the Germans withdrew on May 23, and the Bastards plundered German farms, attacked 2 missionary houses, and took their livestock. It has been noted that this heavy bloodshed on both sides left a strong sense of resentment after the war. Following the Peace of Korab on July 9, 1915, after South Africa had defeated the Germans, it formally took over administration of Southwest Africa from 1915 to 1966 and established martial law. However, the Bastards would not fare well during this period, as after the war they had applied to have their land become a British protectorate, like Basutoland, current-day Lesotho, in 1868, and be a sovereign nation. However, this request was turned down by South Africa, and special rights provided by the Germans was revoked under the South African Mandate to govern Southwest Africa. However, this would not deter the Bastards, who would continue to push for the legitimacy of the Free Republic of Rehoboth, with the Bastards claiming that the republic had been recognized by the League of Nations, adding that the international law supported their desire for self-determination, which the League used as a principle in the organization of new nations after World War, reportedly. In 1952, Basters presented a petition to the United Nations, which was the successor to the League of Nations, with no results, sadly. During this period, some Bastard leaders would go on to found political parties and were active in a number of movements in Southwest Africa. They were reportedly among the first, along with other indigenous groups in the territory, to petition to the United Nations for international intervention to end the South African administration of Southwest Africa, now Namibia, especially due to apartheid, which had had severe legal racial discrimination against the African population, with this being known as the Namibian Struggle for Independence. South Africa passed the Rehoboth Self-Government Act of 1976. They settled for a semi-autonomous Basta homeland, similar in status to Bantustans in South Africa, based around Rehoboth. However, an interesting source I found claims this only occurred to gain their support in the fight against SWAPO. An election was held for a captain. In 1979, Johannes Hans de Kraat won a court challenge to the disputed election, in which the incumbent, Dr. Ben Africa, had placed first, resulting in de Kraat being appointed as the fifth captain of the Basters. Southwest Africa had a population of roughly 1 million, reportedly by 1981. With not more than 35,000 people at the time, Basters had become one of the smallest minority groups in Southwest Africa. In the 1980s, about 1.4 million hectares of farmland was still controlled by the Basters. In 1981, the Basta population was estimated to be at about 25,181 by Hartmut Lang, according to his 1998 article on the Basta group. The Basta Gebied operated until 29 July 1989 due to the imminent independence of Namibia. Upon assuming power in 1990, Namibia's new ruling party, the Southwest African People's Organization SWAPO, announced it would not recognize any special legal status for the Basta community. The Namibian government did not recognize the Basta Captain and Council as a legal authority. Many Bastas felt that they were not represented by the new government. The Captain's Council sought compensation for Rehoboth's land that it claimed had been confiscated by the government, with much of it being sold to non-Bastas. The council was given locus standi, the right of a party to appear and be heard before a court of law. But in 1995, a High Court verdict sadly declared that the Rehoboth lands had been voluntarily handed over to the Namibian government by the Basta community, with it being reported that the Bastas had to buy back the land at much higher prices. In 1998, Captain Hans de Kraat filed an official complaint with the United Nations Human Rights Committee, charging Namibia with violations of minority rights of the Bastas. In the case de Kraat versus Namibia in 2000, the committee ruled that there was evidence of linguistic discrimination, as Namibia refused to use Afrikaans with dealing with the Bastas. On February 2007, the Captain's Council represented the Bastas at the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, UNPO, which works to facilitate the voices of unrepresented and marginalized nations and peoples worldwide, helping minorities to gain self-determination. Since November 2012, the UNPO has called on the government of Namibia to recognize Bastas as a traditional authority in their historic territory, as was done for some of the other ethnic groups in Namibia. As previously mentioned, the Paternal Laws, which had been amended and drafted in 1872, consists of 32 articles, which encompasses all major political activities. The first Captain's Council established the Paternal Laws that acts as a constitution of the Basta people, which continues to influence their community until this day. In regards to their leadership, they had a council of 7 members, which they had adopted the chief structure of the Khoisan, and they had adapted this to themselves. the position of captain is that of a chief, and is a role traditionally once appointed is for life. Such as with a traditional chief, the captain was granted powers to appoint members of a council known as the Chief's Council, with the Paternal Laws also providing for the People's Council, which was elected every 5 years. The Basters have had 7 captains since the Paternal Laws were enacted, which you may view on the screen right now. Previously, under the Paternal Laws, every male Rehoboth citizen had the right to apply for a free piece of land at the age of 18. Although the size of the land gradually decreased over the years due to costs and land shortages, they continued to honor this until the 21st of March, 1990. When the new government took over the lands, the newly independent Namibian government passed legislation about land use and title that took precedence over Bastard tradition, such as Basters can no longer allocate land to their young men. The land is now controlled by the local town council, which replaced the Chief's Council. A final conclusion can be made that the Basters have a long and interesting history, which I feel I did not fully cover as it's just so long and diverse. However, this history shows us the determination and strength of the Bastard community. If I had missed something or misreported something in this video, please do let me know in the comments and I will respond to you. Also, if you have any topics you would like me to cover, please do let me also know in the comments and I'll do just that. And don't forget to subscribe and have an amazing day. Thank you for watching.